All right, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone. I'm going to pass things off to Damon Henriksen to get us started.
Thanks, Twyla. Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's virtual panel, Let's Talk Trash, Designing Beyond Disposal. My name is Damon Henriksen. I'm the Director of Marketing and New Business Development at Made to Measure Metrology. Today's program is put on by the Illinois Green Alliance Programs Committee, a volunteer group that coordinates educational events covering a wide range of topics throughout the year for the green building industry. The team that organized today's event consists of Caitlin Veenstra, Helen Ho, and myself. Next slide, Twyla. Jump over there. You have all been muted upon entry, so please type any questions you have throughout the session into the Q&A, and we'll get them answered at the end. The webinar is being recorded and will be sent out in a follow-up email. For those who are unfamiliar with us, Illinois Green Alliance is a membership-driven nonprofit organization that advances green building and sustainable communities for all. Our 5-year strategic plan pushes the green building industry to meet or get on the path to net zero. We'll achieve this through educational events like panels and building tours, by engaging communities and partnering with organizations across Illinois, and advocating for new policies and legislation. Check out our website, illinoisgreenalliance.org, to view recordings of our past webinars, see upcoming events, learn more about our membership, and find ways to get involved. The webinar is approved through AIA for 1 LU credit and can be logged for 1 LEED AP or Green Associate CE hour. To request an AIA CE credit or a personalized certificate of completion for architectural licensee reporting purposes, follow the QR code on the screen and complete the link form. We'll also be linking the form in the chat now and at the end of the session. For those interested in self-reporting CE hours for your LEED AP or LEED Green Associate credentials, we'll be sharing self-reporting instructions and a fillable certificate of completion in our follow-up email to all attendees next week. And here are today's AIA learning objectives. We also want to take a moment to recognize our Illinois Green Alliance's sustaining sponsors who make all our work possible. A special thank you to our gold level sponsors, ComEd, USGBC, and Sloan. Make a commitment to advancing green buildings and communities across the state by visiting illinoisgreenalliance.org sponsorships to start a conversation about a sponsor partnership today. Now I'd like to introduce you to today's speakers. Brandon Kersey is part of Engineered Floors Commercial Division. Engineered Floors is the 3rd largest flooring manufacturer in the U.S. Brandon has worked in the flooring industry for nearly 30 years with leadership roles in manufacturing, technical, R&D, and sales. Susan Olson, Lead AP, is a seasoned design professional with more than 20 years of experience spanning interior design, architecture, sales, and education. As brand manager for Endure Materials, she specializes in high-performance materials for commercial environments, working closely with architects, designers, and facility teams across the country. A passionate advocate for environmental stewardship, she combines deep product knowledge with a keen understanding of the design industry and its challenges, offering a valuable insight to every project and audience she supports. Our panel is being moderated by our program committee's own Caitlin Veenstra. She is the Director of Sustainability at Ryan Companies. She will lead an audience Q&A, so please remember to add your questions to the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen throughout the program, so our speakers can address them at the end. So now I'm going to pass things on to Caitlin to get us started.
Thank you, Damon. As everybody on the call probably knows, circularity, reuse, everything to do with materials can be a very large and very complex topic. So our goal today is just to facilitate a discussion around some of the things to help designers make those decisions about what products to use, maybe how to coordinate with a team if you do inherit an existing building on best next steps with a material that's at its end of life. And as far as the industry goes, this topic continues to change, continues to evolve. We'll share some resources at the end that are not part of this presentation, but are free available online resources designed to help design industry professionals with this. But some of the changes even coming from USGBC are going to help foster more momentum in the circularity and reuse space. So just a real quick preview on that. We're not going to go in detail on LEED today. But some of the credit changes coming with version 5 to the materials and resources category, specifically a new credit split apart from the life cycle assessment, is going to prioritize building material reuse in a new way, both structural components and some of the more interior materials like we'll talk about today. And then as part of the construction and demolition waste management credit that is changing, there's an increased priority on source separation and single stream recycling. One option for single stream recycling could be manufacturer take back programs that are available for some of the materials we'll talk about today. But there's also a higher priority in that credit towards salvaging or reusing materials as part of that landfill diversion path. So again, really a focus on resource efficiency and best use of products coming from other industry signals as well. So I will go ahead and stop sharing the screen now, and let's dive in to really start talking about some of the ways that this complex ecosystem of material circularity happens right now and some of the best ways we can try and improve it for our projects. So starting out, you guys are both experts in different categories of interior materials. How does circular design apply across different material categories in your experience?
First, I want to know that Brandon, okay, there you go. I think that you've probably have all experienced the scenario of how do you get the egg out of the cake. There are many different materials, and when we install them or add like a finish to a fabric, we need to meet local fire retardant codes. And in doing that, as an example, can complicate the recyclability of something. So I think Brandon has some great information to share as well.
Yeah, thank you, Suze. Yeah, that is a challenge because not just flooring in my world, but most products we use in interior finishes and furnishings are combinations of materials with disparate properties in some cases. So that can be very difficult. There are very few homogeneous materials that we use. So therefore, recycling can be a challenge. And when we talk about end of life, that is just one option. And sometimes it is the best option and sometimes it isn't. I think you have to look at it on a product by product basis as to how effective each one of the options are.
Great. I know we'll get into some examples of specific materials that you both work with a little bit later. How do we define life cycle considerations throughout the design phase? So again, we've talked about circularity as a broad topic. There's different types of end of life scenarios for materials. Can you guys walk us through some of the basics for what those life cycle considerations could be?
Yes, I like to also kind of go back to the elementary aspect of the 3 Rs, the reduce, reuse, and recycle. Really thinking about maximizing resource efficiency and looking for something that can remain in place for a long period of time. Minimizing waste and maximizing a product for a longer period of time is going to save on many different, the installation cost, the manpower, the materials, and so forth. Brandon and I both have a pretty strong commitment to the material that stays in place the longest is the one that is the most sustainable. I think also, you know, looking at products, we like to think that we have the possibility to recycle things easily, but the truth be told is it is very difficult, and it's challenging in terms of getting things back and then being able to have the technology to take them all apart.
Absolutely. Thanks. Building on that, Sue, you know, you talked about the end of life and the impact of a product lasting longer. And you can see that on this chart within a life cycle assessment. The green that you see at the bottom is the impact, in this case, the global warming potential, but this would hold true for pretty much all impacts of a manufactured product. The green is the impact of the initial product, raw material extraction, and production of the product, in this case, a carpet tile. But again, this could hold true for any furnishing or finish. This is over the life of a building. So you have your initial impact there of the product, but this blue bar and this orange bar, those represent use and replacement over the life of a 75-year building life. So as you can see, the big impacts there are the replacements and the use of that product, especially the replacements. So if you can utilize products that will be in service longer, you will make huge impacts to that overall impact over those 75 years, because you won't repeat that raw material extraction, production, shipment, installation, removal over and over as often. So you could have a massive impact with products that are more durable and have a longer use life, as opposed to sometimes we get enamored by things that are kind of shiny and have all these nice attributes, but they may or may not last. And if you're using those products over and over and over, and you're turning them more often, you're going to have an even worse effect than what you see in this chart.
Brendan, while you have this, oh, I was gonna say,
I
if you
can
want to
put it
answer
back.
one
Fear
question
not.
while you have it pulled up, I just saw one pop up in the chat. If you could explain in a little more detail why the global warming potential of the replacement is more than the installation.
So
It feels like
let's
a
look
good
at
thing to
these
do while we've got it on
categories.
the slide.
That's good. Let's look at these categories. That may help explain it if you're
I think
familiar
we're on
with,
your other screen. We're seeing the notes.
oh, sorry. That's not what I wanted. Bear with me. The perils of having two screens. All right. So we'll look at let's look at the definitions of the phases, and that'll help make more sense. Sorry. I know you don't have to look at me scroll for a minute, but if you notice, what you're looking at here are phases mainly B2 and B4. So if we look at our descriptions of phases in the scope, B2 is maintenance, and then you have B4 is replacement. So that's the things that during the life of the product, and replacement is huge. It's the same size as maintenance. So imagine if you could take that bar with replacement, you've got, when you do replacements, you've got not only the embodied carbon in this case of the raw materials in manufacturing, but again, removal of the previous flooring, shipment of the new flooring, installation of that flooring, and then removal of that flooring, and begats, in this case, 4 times over. So imagine if you can get that to 3 times over instead of 4. That's a small improvement, you would think. If I can just eke 5 or 10 more years of life out of this product that lasts longer, that's going to have a massive impact, because that's going to be one less turn. So you will have more impact than the initial impact of the product itself with one reduction in turns. Hope that makes sense.
I think so. Thank you for pulling that back up again. Moving on to, again, our next topic, I think, again, we're talking about a lot of those composite interior finish materials that you guys specialize in.
Sure.
And those are, right, not often recycled or let's say reused or salvaged into a new installation. We're often talking about recycling, and recycling itself can be broken into both upcycling and downcycling. Can you talk to us a little bit about the difference between upcycling, downcycling, and then even what a closed loop looks like if it exists out there for building materials?
Sure. You want to hit that first, Sue, or do you want me to?
I think looking at materials that are natural materials, if we would think of a stone, a natural stone, a brick, glass, certain metals, those things that are more permanent in a building space. Being from Chicago and the Merchandise Mart, I'm just going to give a silly little shout out to the bathroom partitions. You know, those probably at one point in the life of that building have probably been considered to be replaced, right? They've been in great shape, really haven't needed replacement. And thank goodness that they have remained there because they have stand the testimony of time. And they are still functioning today as when they were first put in that building. So looking at things in the most natural state makes them easier to recycle. And I also think in these examples are the most durable to endure or withstand the test of time. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, that's a good lead in. And when we talk about upcycling, downcycling, sometimes the concept of downcycling actually has negative connotations sometimes. And that's not necessarily a valid negative connotation. I mean, take this water bottle. This is very clear polyester, right? No, not a lot of additives or anything. See right through it. It is nearly impossible to put water bottles back into water bottles. That would be, quote, closed loop or upcycling. That produces a bottle that has inferior appearance and properties. And that has to do with the fact that when you break this down, you get broken chains in the polymer. I have seen a bottle that was recycled with just some post-consumer recycled content of bottles in it, and it was kind of a dingy yellow color, pretty gross looking, and it did not have good strength or flexibility. So, you know, to sometimes for the sake of saying, hey, I put water bottles back in water bottles, you'd actually be detrimental to the attributes of the product. That could produce in our world, in terms of finishes, a product that doesn't last as long because it has compromised attributes. So you have to be careful of that. You know, I'll take this. This isn't a commercial, but it's a dang good example. If you take our Kinetics textile composite flooring, each tile contains 27 used water bottles. That is a better use of used water bottles than putting water bottles back in water bottles, because that backing system that goes in performs just as well with recycled water bottles in it as it does with virgin polyester in it, and lasts a really long time. So we don't need to get too enamored with, in my opinion, and I've long had some long-standing opinions on recycled content. For example, I also don't think that you should value post-consumer any more than post-industrial, because both of them displace virgin material that would have to be extracted and processed. So that one has gotten rocks thrown at me several times, but I will always have that opinion.
And that's a great example with your particular product too, right? Post-consumer doesn't necessarily mean it's a different flooring tile that went into this flooring tile or another ceiling tile that went into the ceiling tile. It could be something else post-consumer that is now making up that material
Right.
complex
And,
of that,
and it may
which
be
is a little behind the
a better
scenes.
scenario. Absolutely. It may have less impact and have more longevity in another product instead of going back into itself. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, this is some great overall context. We've talked a lot about kind of what that circularity space looks like for interior materials, some of the complexities that come with trying to make them truly circular or put them back into their own value chain. How can you guys each walk us through maybe a specific example of a product or a product category that you work with frequently, and maybe talk through how to evaluate the circular potential? So as a designer's thinking about making a selection in this product category, what are some complexities that come with that selection? And then what are maybe some best use cases to think about that could be end of life for that product?
I'll share an example of our wall covering that have essentially a wear layer on the surface that allows for a very durable product that can be last for quite a long time. Um, I will say that when we are designing for longevity, we need to think about things that have a more timeless appearance and maybe staying away from such trendy, um, patterns or colors and keeping a more neutral. I think of the old example of you invest in a large piece of furniture, right? You have your sofa. You invest in that and you change out the accessories, the pillows, the ways that you can personalize that space to be on trend, or fit that particular personality for that time frame. I know that it is difficult sometimes to want, we always want to have, like Brandon said, that shiny and new something. But what are some creative ways that we can work around that and still have things maintained in space longer period of time? I have an installation photo that was taken from a prominent hospital healthcare system, if you want to show that quick. They think this was installed in I think it said 86. And looking at this, you can see the top example does look a little more dated than the bottom portion. And this is where I give a great example about thinking of your material choice to be a little bit more timeless. But this has been in place. It is doesn't need a whole lot of special care for maintenance, and it has endured. It has stayed there. It hasn't required the replacement costs, the downtime of the facility. And I hope that can, the pattern on the floor may also help to give away that time frame, but thinking about ways that you can make things last longer in place. So I hope that gives an example.
Great example, Sue. And it's like you said, when you're dealing with a product that is a combination of components that does sometimes limit the options in terms of end of life, especially in terms of recycling, much like, say, most flooring products. And so we run into the same kind of thing where, and I think we've kind of, I don't want to say this in a bad way, but we probably oversold the concept a little bit in the industry, over marketed it, because very little of, let's take a carpet, for example, goes back into carpet well, because you end up with all these different polymers and things that are together in the sandwich. Just like you said, how do you take the egg out of the cake? Well, you take the egg out of the cake, it's going to have other stuff stuck to it.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
you're not going to end up with a pure egg. Well, it's the same thing with the components in most flooring. When you go to recycle that and you pull it apart, you get contamination. You also have contamination, for example, from adhesives or things from the building site that also can cause a product to not be recycled at all in many cases, or if it is, with very low yield. So, and I say carpet, but again, that's true of many interior finishes and furnishings.
And if I recall correctly, that's where it comes back to that. Can you use a natural material? Can you use something more kind of single component compared to multi-component? And I believe when we talked about this too, one of the considerations that designers factor into their selections is what's the installation context of this? To your example is from a hospital. Obviously, different considerations go into selecting a wall covering or a flooring product for a hospital setting than an office setting or the corridor in a housing project. And so can you give any additional context maybe on how that setting could factor into expectations of longevity?
Yeah, I think also it's the expectations that we have, you know, obviously like looking at um, hospitality, a restaurant, a hotel. There's always that pressure on how can you, they refresh every 7 years. Oh my goodness, think of the amount of waste that we're causing every 7 years to look new. So what are, ways, that's a challenge. I'm going to say, hey, challenge accepted, to think about how can you reuse something in a creative way, or accept things to stay in place longer. I don't know if I really answered your question, but I hope that
You
I
did,
think
and it's
I
a
do
great
think it's,
transition to the next one too.
yeah.
If you want me to feed you that one, we were going to talk about the role that designers can play in getting things recycled and reused. So I think that education component, maybe if you want to speak to that next, is flowing out of your previous topic, right? There's a role that we have in decision making, and there's a role that the rest of a team, including an owner, has too. How can we help educate the group?
Yes, I think we need to think of ourselves, as advocates, as educators, and to be more accepting. We have this thing called consumerism that has, kind of become this mighty giant, the elephant in the room. And how can we work around that? We need to change expectations. We need to change our mindset to be accepting of things of quality for longer periods of time. And that starts with having that conversation. Maybe when you're looking at designing for a hospitality or restaurant space, what are things that we can put in here that can make it through 2 or 3 of your different brand, cycle changes? And look at those things as you expect those to remain. And then what are other things that you could change? So I think it is a challenge for designers and architects. And that's a conversation that I think is very important to have with people, and to help, lay that groundwork of acceptance.
Brandon, would you like to add anything on the education
Sure.
and advocacy piece, or provide any insights on, again, helping to plan maybe with contractors or the rest of the team to help facilitate that circularity if there is an opportunity?
Yes, absolutely. I think a lot of it is setting expectations and asking questions both up front and at the end of life. If you were, especially if you're, redoing a commercial space and replacing what's in it. I did see a question. Somebody mentioned a carpet tile company that does take backs. Are they not using it recycle into more carpet? And in some cases, yes, but do bear in mind that there are several barriers to that. One of those is, again, that yield of material, contamination. How much of it can you use feasibly? Also, the bigger challenge, and this is what I'm glad you mentioned contractors and things like that, is getting the material. Because you got to get the material off the floor. It needs to be fairly contaminant free, and it needs to be palletized. It needs to be, you can't use the same reckless abandon that you would use to remove flooring if you weren't recycling it or reusing, that you would use if you were disposing of it in another way, either waste to energy or if it was going to landfill. You can be a lot more sloppy. So it's going to be more expensive in terms of the cost to remove. So that needs to be brought up of what that's going to entail. And what we do in terms of our reclamation program, we're going to provide options. When you say, what can be done with this flooring that is coming up, we're going to look for multiple options and provide those options with costs. So you people can fully understand the ramifications of what they are dealing with.
Yeah, that's a good point. I'm just going to piggyback on that, is planning early with your stakeholders and the contractors so that you have the budgeted cost and the mindset, the budget, and the planning to prepare for take back programs, or those types of things.
Great. I will open this up here. I see another Q&A has just popped up. We'll take a couple audience questions and then we'll share some of those resources and wrap up with maybe one more question for you guys before the end of our time here. So the question that just appeared in the chat is, are there installation options that make removal easier? For example, something other than adhesives, or maybe a particular style of applying adhesives. I don't know if that's an option for both wall covering and flooring, or if it's the same for both.
Oh, I don't know if I know the answer to
So
that.
I can tell you that from a flooring standpoint. For example,
Okay.
there are some methods that don't utilize adhesive. So we have a product called tile tabs, which is a non-adhesive system, and you peel those tabs off and they can be used with either any of our carpet tile, our Nexus modular carpet tile, or with our 5mm LVT. So in those cases, you would not have to use a full spread adhesive.
Okay. Yeah, for most wall covering applications, you would have adhesive, absolutely. Other things that might be a little bit more easier to recycle, I think, might be some window shading screens. Those are things that, it's just you're taking apart the mechanical components, but then you would be able to reuse the screens or the shades themselves. So that would be an area that I think might be a good one to look at for a true, closed loop success story. Again, it's trade-offs, and not every material has that ability. It's just it's an unfortunate truth to have to speak, but there are things that are just very difficult. But window shades would be something, perhaps some types of fabrics for upholstering. Those would have, but then again, you get into that situation, if it's been treated, then that changes the game. So it depends on the fiber content and what has gone into making that textile.
Nothing new in the chat right now, but I want to pick up on that, maybe that treatment angle that you talked about, Sue. So we talked a little bit about this in the prep. We didn't go into detail on material health. I know there's a lot of firms out there who may have signed Red List Free or the AIA Materials Pledge. And one example that comes to mind is vinyl, right? Sometimes when you recycle vinyl back into the supply chain, you're bringing in toxic and heavy metals. So it's a good example of why maybe some vinyl flooring from older generations should not be part of new vinyl flooring. How can designers appropriately weight health standards when they're making these already complex decisions about circularity or products?
Sure. That's a good question. Yeah, I will say that, for all of our products, we do have EPDs and HPDs. And if they are red list free, we'll have a red list free declare label as well on it. So if you do have any concerns about any components, you can find them there. Now, to your point, what is on the floor already? Most of what's out there on the floor in terms of, if you were pulling, for example, a carpet tile up, it would have to be really old to have any heavy metals in it or anything, or even any orthophthalate plasticizers, which can also be a concern. Orthophthalates haven't been used in carpet tiles since the late 90s, early 2000s. So it would have to have been pretty old. Metals, heavy metals, probably you wouldn't find any of that in the past 20 years either, because there are some misconceptions about both of those things, that those are tied to current PVC products, and they're not. But we also provide plenty of options for new product that are non-PVC. We have that in all of our platforms, have non-PVC options as well. And we don't put recycled content back into our LVT for the very reason you discussed. Heavy metals, I'll give you an example. Some LVT recycled content historically could come from billboard material. That's vinyl that's on the billboards. But in order for it to not fade, they tend to have heavy metal stabilizers in them, or at least historically have. So if you then put that outdoor material into an indoor material like flooring, you've introduced heavy metals into that. And that's specifically why, somebody says, hey, why don't you have recycled content in your LVT? That's why. You would be putting an X in one box to check another box. And that's not necessarily a good trade-off.
Mm-hmm.
All right,
I was looking at this question.
go for it, Sue.
Yeah, current legislation and materials, looking at ways to support legislation. I think that, working with manufacturers would be an important kind of liaison step. Juliet, I'm not sure what your role is, but that would be, kind of putting those people together for conversations. I think that would probably be first step, is getting those two different parties together.
I do see a question from a contractor perspective here, and it's asking if they should be cognizant of, prior to the job start and during construction, do you order a 30-yard dumpster for a demo and then throw everything in there? Same dumpster, no separating? Well, that's a very good question. That goes back to that conversation of getting ahead of that up front and throwing that into the scope. If you're going to do reclamation of, in my case, flooring, then you're going to go on our website and fill out a form, and it's going to say there's this much stuff on the floor and it is this type of flooring. And then there will be quotes generated around having a separate, you're going to separate that out and palletize it, and then it's going to have separate transportation. So you wouldn't throw everything in the same dumpster, because there's no way that's going to get sorted out once it's in that 30-yard dumpster. So there's a lot of logistics and cost that go with those logistics that need to be understood up front. So yeah, absolutely. You're going to want to get way ahead of that, both from a project management standpoint, and then working that into the scope of the project, the cost of the project, and the logistics of the project.
Yeah, one of the most useful takeaways I've heard on recently is, if you are working with a project where you have an opportunity to salvage or recycle some interior finishes, to add in a site walk and really focus on surveying what's in the space in detail, right? The condition of it's also important. If you have water damaged or broken ceiling tiles, the manufacturer still may not take them back, even if it's the right product chain. So really surveying how much you have, what it could be, what shape it's in, and then doing exactly what Brandon said of sitting down and kind of finding that forum, finding that contact, and going through their process, ideally ahead of when you have to order your dumpsters. So that way, you know, do I have to leave space for that dumpster and also some pallets, or is this an opportunity where this stuff is so old, no one's going to want it, it's maybe not safe to recycle, and then it's one less headache for you when you're really busy with everything else you need to mobilize. Great questions from the chat today. One last one here, and then the reclamation scope you're talking about, is that usually GC scope or special subcontractors? I think that probably varies a little bit based on material, but would one of you like to take that one first?
Yeah, I can.
Brandon, do you have thoughts?
You know, yes, it's going to depend. I think that the earlier in the project you get it in there, if you put it in the scope of the project coming from the A&D firm, for example, that that lets everybody get ahead of it even quicker, because getting ahead of it is what it's going to take. So that would go from, theoretically, and like Caitlin said, that can probably vary depending on the specific project, but ideally it would be in the scope of the project from A&D to the general contractor, so that they are accounting for that, and then their subcontractors who actually carry it out have that instruction when they're doing the bid, because the flooring contractor is going to give a different cost for gingerly removing flooring and palletizing it versus the scorched earth approach that they would normally like to take and go through and get all that off the floor and get that floor prepped and new floor down pronto.
And I think everything has to be reported from the subcontractor to the general contractor. So it would need to come initially with the GC, and then that, like Brandon said, would trickle down.
I agree with both of you. And I think if you get into scopes that involve maybe even reuse, whether it's on your project or a different project, we're not just talking about maybe a specialist to take it out of the existing project, but if it's, let's say you're salvaging your hollow metal doors to refinish and put them back in, or even more complex, you're going to try and take apart your structural members and have them reused for whether the same purpose or a different purpose, you may be getting into both a special deconstruction firm that the GC would be sourcing in addition to their demolition sub, and scheduling those two groups, but you may also be getting into storage. Where is this going to go? Who's going to process it in time to bring it back to where it needs to be? And then where's it going to sit while it's waiting? Our firm has done some historic salvage from an old bank building that was torn down and put some of those back into, it's just artwork in our case, back into a project as artwork. And the storage question became that most time sensitive and expensive one, to find a firm to rehabilitate some of those pieces and find out that there's lead paint on some of them and we have to abate that, but then also have them sit in a warehouse until that space is ready for their install. And it turned out to be a great feature, but it added that complexity. And so really sitting down early to say, we want to do this. What are all the different groups who should be part of this ecosystem and make this happen? And who needs to be informed at each stage beyond the general contractor to make sure that all of those things take place? And, you know, our storage permit doesn't expire, or our lease doesn't expire before those things are ready to be placed back in the building safely.
That is well said, Caitlin. You
Yeah.
really conveyed the complexity of that. And I am not sure, you said that from the perspective of somebody who's been through it. And
I was
there
out
is,
there
it's
looking
a,
at the really
yeah.
cool pieces of tile mural to salvage myself and taking measurements in crates that were also full of spiders. But it was worth it. It was absolutely worth it. And it
Yeah.
was much better, in my opinion, than ordering new artwork. And to be able to scale that up to, you know, reusing actual functional components of buildings too, I think is such an exciting opportunity. And like I said, thinking about the opportunities that don't have aesthetic consequences, right? You don't have to pull out and reuse your ceiling tiles because that might look different, but you can refinish a door. Trying to think outside the box. And I'm going to pivot this. I can absolutely take another question from the chat if it pops up. But while we're kind of on this subject of examples, if you guys could each share one or two practical takeaways for our teams. We now know we've got representation from a lot of different groups in the industry, contractors, designers, and others. There's one to two things from our previous discussion you just want to reiterate for the group as a really important takeaway on this subject of circularity, reuse, and how we can all try and make it happen a little bit more on our projects.
Sure. I mean, I'm gonna keep beating the drum. the product that stays in use the longest has the least impact when you're talking about from a sustainability standpoint. And so that's key. So durability will trump everything in terms of sustainability and impact. The other thing is get way ahead of it, because the complexity, the outlets for material vary over time. The available outlets, the logistics of those outlets, and the costs associated with that vary over time. And so the earlier you get on it, the better off you're going to be.
Agreed, 100%. I think, what do people pay attention to but their pocketbook? And if you can, part of your advocacy be illustrating the cost savings that this project can realize when they reuse something rather than replace it. I think that is maybe one way to get people's attention. I know I have struggled with that. It's like we've just become so, that's our default is, we're doing a project, it gets switched out. And, changing that mindset, having something that can stay in place and have little impact with, think about if somebody is talking about, really wanting to follow through on decarbonization, what you're saving on the replacement to ship things there, new product there, and ship the old product away. I mean, that is tremendous financially, and that concept. So that, I guess, is my takeaway, and looking at things from a more timeless approach.
So you touched a little bit on the question that just came in. I don't know, Brandon, if you had wanted to add anything on how to incentivize owners to help get them comfortable with the additional cost that comes sometimes with participation in those reclamation programs, or the time it takes for that sensitive demolition.
Sure. I mean, I think it's, do they want to be part of something? The easiest thing for the owner is to say, I'm going to take the least expensive option, and that's not going to be, in most cases, an end of life that involves more complicated scenarios than throwing it in a dumpster. So, I mean, at the end of the day, it has to appeal to the end user or the owner.
Mm-hmm.
How do you make it appeal to them? Well, I think that's in your conversations, like I said, mainly from an A&D standpoint to begin with, is helping them understand what the options are and what the ramifications of those options are.
Yeah, and there are some manufacturer take back programs where the pickup's free or the shipping is free, but you still have to do the pallets, you have to take the extra time. So it's never going to be
Absolutely.
net neutral. Even if you
Right.
try and demonstrate the cost savings of less dumpster that you need to buy, it's always going to be a little extra. And I think that that savings is worth it. And yes, I think we have time for the one question that just came in the chat. Talk a little bit about how LEED and ESG commitments can help incentivize this reuse. So we touched on version 5 before, right? Single stream recycling can come into play with us. Maybe focusing a little harder on some of those reclamation programs for interior projects in particular. Obviously, metal is a great single stream recycling option too. But then I think that really unique feature on additional weight counted for salvaged materials is also a good piece towards that design conversation. What do you guys think about how LEED and ESG commitments can help influence and improve participation in this space? Have you seen transitions in essentially some of the conversations you've been having on design over the years as ESG has entered the scene and LEED has been changing?
Sue is a good lead resource. I'm gonna defer to her on that primarily.
I don't know if I'm that. I think that oh gosh, people are aware and they want to do the right thing. It's unfortunately, cost is that thing that gets in the way. But that would be, I think people do have good intentions, and people do utilize those that foundation for their projects as how they're going to approach material choice. I think that what we're going to be seeing now with more of the material focus on low emitting materials, and looking at items that can stay in place longer. We may see, I think, more, I guess, moving the needle, if that sounds correct.
Absolutely. And I'll add in, it's not necessarily an ESG focus for all companies, but sometimes what you'll find, especially if you're salvaging or if you're reusing or even selectively deconstructing, oftentimes the firms that participate in those, different than the big national reclamation programs on products, those can be local businesses or smaller businesses. And so for some companies or for some clients, that ability to contribute back to their local community might be a really strong pull. So even if it costs a little more money, but they have a story they can tell from it, or they have that value of supporting their community, that might be an angle that you can bring to them, as opposed to just saying it's all going to this landfill down the street for cheaper. But in this case, we were able to help another business grow through this effort. Maybe it takes a little extra time, but that may be a quality angle that helps resonate when that financial story isn't always completely there for them.
Yeah. I think too, this is another little tidbit that I had from my experiences in teaching and trying to get people to care think about when we say throw away, what is away? Where is away? Where does it go? Help to give some more context about what that looks like and why this is such a topic that we should be caring about more. And so think about when we say throw away, well, where's away? Where is it going? Again, maybe kind of elementary, but we have to be advocates, and you have to speak in ways, like, we're not scientists, right? We need to be able to think about things in a simpler view, I think, before we can make greater change.
Right. Well, I will go ahead and pivot us to our last takeaway for the group. I'll share my screen. We have a couple resources that I've pulled together to share with everybody. All of these are available for free online. The first one's geared towards structural materials. It's not just reuse. It's about kind of all the sustainability considerations that go towards the structural space, especially since we didn't get to touch on that today. And it's formatted as this really neat graphic map on kind of how you make decisions regarding structures at different points in time. The next one, for those looking for really tactical, practical steps, especially on the process you go through for reuse, is this Project Manager's Guide to Building Reuse. This is a great resource produced out of Minnesota. And this is geared toward, it includes some case studies, and it's geared towards both designers and contractors. So download this if you haven't come across it before. And the last one is a national resource called the All for Reuse Ecosystem Map. And so this includes both deconstruction firms, but also spaces where you can donate or locally reuse materials. And they do their best to keep it up to date, but it's got some great traction in specific states regarding firms that you may not have come across in the commercial industry before, or places where you can source a contractor to help you with some of this scope. So recommend starting there if nowhere else and you're not sure because you're working in a new market. With that, we will leave you guys all with this survey. We would appreciate anyone's kind feedback, constructive criticism. We'll take it all. This is an ever-evolving conversation about circularity and reuse, and I can guarantee, because this has come back up for Illinois Green every year, probably not the last time we'll be talking about building material trash in Illinois Green's future. And so the more we can evolve the educational content we present to you, the better we can all make building industry for Illinois. So please share your thoughts, and thank you all for attending today. Thank you both to our great panelists as well. We appreciate your time.
Thank
Thank you for
you.
having us.
Thank you, everyone. I am so appreciative of your time, and audience, I just threw those links in the chat. If you're interested in clicking through them, we'll also put those in our follow-up email for everyone. And yeah, we'd love to have your feedback. And if you need to report for AIA, this is your chance. I'm going to put that link in the chat one last time. it will not be available after the live session is over. So thank you again, everyone, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
All right. Bye, everybody.